Hello and welcome to a marriage seminar called Lovers and Other Married Couples. Thanks for tuning in and watching today. Just so you know what's coming, we're going to do 7 sessions on marriage under this title, Lovers and, if you didn't catch the humor, and Other Married Couples, because all married couples apparently are not lovers. We're going to do 7 sessions on it. The sessions will be anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes or so long. There'll be a little time in between a couple of them for you to take a quick break and run grab a snack or whatever you need to do. But for the most part, please know that we'll begin and end each session by telling you what it is and what the title of it is, what the topic is. And then please know our purpose today. Our purpose is just to try to help us improve the quality of our marriages. Especially during this pandemic, we've noticed a terrible increase in marital problems and matters. We are facing a higher rate of divorce filings than usual. It's bad enough that in our country, half of our marriages end in divorce. But because I'm a Christian and my premise today will be based on Scripture as a Christian pastor, it's equally disappointing that even Christian marriages, about half of them end in divorce. And so over the last few months, some of you have had the wonderful experience of being quarantined with your spouse. Some of you have great results. You're more in love and more happy than ever. Some of you, however, probably wish you could roll the clock back and make a few changes. And if that's you, I'm sorry, and I hope that we can offer a little tweaking today to improve the quality and the status of marriage. We're going to start with session 1 of 7, and session 1 is about the original design. Because I'm Christian and we're going to make this a Bible-based seminar, the original design always refers to Genesis. Every premise that we start our relationship with God with and with our fellow man with will find its roots somewhere in the first 5 books of the Bible, most likely in the book of Genesis. Genesis itself, the word means beginnings. It is a book of beginnings, or the original foundation or formation of all things made by God. And so since we turn to the book of Genesis, we'll learn about Adam and Eve and the original design and the original foundation from God's particular concept of marriage. It's humorous in the 2nd chapter because God says about Adam and Eve after he makes them and puts them together, then he says, "For this cause will a man leave his mother and father." The reason I say it's humorous is because they had no mother and father. And so right off the bat, the minute we see those words, they should indicate to us God is trying to lay a foundation for something. Because clearly they didn't leave mother and father to be married, so there must be a foundation being laid. And so that's what we're learning in that verse. When God said after he put them together, "For this cause will a man leave his mother and father," and they had no mother and father to leave, then he is explaining to us for future generations to come, this will be the concept of marriage. You will leave mother and father, and you'll find someone with whom you want to cleave for the rest of your life. So that's the beginning, that's the design. And then to summarize basically what he's saying is that marriage is going to be a covenant between a man and a woman. It will be separate and apart from mom and dad, and it'll result in procreation, the word one. Let me explain the middle part of that. Separate and apart from mother and father. When the foundational premise of marriage is first between a man and a woman, second, independent of their parents, the foundation that he's laying for marriage is not to disregard parents and that we're not influenced by them. It's not necessarily telling us, hey, if you still need your parents to help you, that's understandable. The idea of this phrase being injected in the original design in the first couple that had no mother and father to leave. So God teaching us something about the years to come. The idea behind it can be summed up better this way. A man and a woman who believes they're ready to get married, they're old enough, they're smart enough, they're in love enough to get married, should be able to do so without the dependence of mother and father. If they're not capable of living on their own, they're probably not ready for marriage. That's the idea behind this, because we know it's not about dishonoring or disrespecting parents, because one of the commandments that God gave Moses was honor thy father and thy mother, that it may be well with you on the earth and you may live long. That's the first promise, the first commandment, by the way, that actually had a promise conditioned to it. So what we're looking at when we see this phrase, this verse, that a man and a woman will leave mother and father and cleave unto each other, what we're looking at in that phrase, leaving mother and father, is not hating them and not dishonoring them, but not needing them. And so I think what God's trying to tell us is marriage was never supposed to be about babies. You're not supposed to be marrying a 12-year-old or an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old. I say that, and my mother was 14 when she married. But I can also look back and say, probably wasn't the best thing that could have happened. Ideally, if we let Scripture be our foundation for marriage, ideally, we don't marry someone until we are capable of living on our own without our mother and father. And then the third part of that screen says that they two shall be one. The verse actually says one flesh. The second chapter of Genesis, verse 24, says, and they two shall be one flesh. Some people think that means in procreation, that when he put them together, he wasn't just saying they'll be one, because you can't actually be physically one, but they will become one flesh, meaning they will have a child that they could only have together. Two men can't have a child, two women can't have a child, a man and a woman can have a child, and they two shall become one flesh, is what that verse is trying to tell us. So marriage was a covenant. It required independence of the two people getting married, and part of its purpose is the procreation of the human race, continuing to have kids. The marriage design, the next two screens briefly will tell us about design and foundation principles. So the first one is marriage design is God created us, and God created marriage in that same context. If you read the book of Genesis, account of Adam, Adam was already alive, working, and busy before God made Eve. He was already naming animals. He was already, the Bible says he named the animals that God brought from the ground. God made them from the earth. Adam gave him a name, and the verse actually says, and whatever name Adam gave him, God said, that's good, that's okay. And then after a while, at some point, God, the account of Genesis is, God looked at man and said, it's not good for him to be alone. And then he put him to sleep, took a rib, made the woman. And so what we get from that is God was communing with Adam long before she came along. And then when she came along, Adam communed with her. We actually don't have any record that God spoke to her after he made her until he came in the garden one day and they had hid themselves. And that's the first time we see them as a team responding to God. That doesn't mean he didn't talk to her before, and there's no way, I'm not implying any kind of diminishing trait here. The point I'm trying to make is that Adam, before he ever knew Eve, because God hadn't made her yet, Adam, before he ever knew Eve, already had established a relationship with God. Great marriages don't occur by accident. Great marriages occur because the husband has already made an established move toward God. A man that already has a relationship with God and marries a woman will only marry a woman who respects that relationship and who will want to be a partner with him in his relationship with God, and vice versa. But using the original design, we're starting with Adam, commune with God, then God made Eve, and then came the disaster. Eve was made, number 3 up there says Eve was made for, she was made for him. There's a hint going on here, and it's not subservient. It's not master and slave. The hint is that he was not complete until she was made, and she was not made to be complete without him. Adam is already busy. He's naming animals. He's tending the garden. He's doing whatever God designed him to do, when God looks at him and says it's not good for him to be alone. And so then God makes a help meet, a help fit, suitable for him. And that tells us that if God took a portion of him to make her for his help suited for him, then he didn't make her to be standalone either. He made her to need him and him to need her. That's the foundation of our marriage, the design God gave us. They worked as a team. When they were confronted, they blamed something or someone. And then finally, you notice that they reaped the rewards of their behavior as a team as well. It's kind of the scripture's way of saying marriage is really, really important, and you're not ever going to be able to just stand apart and say, I know I married her or him, but please don't judge me by him. I'm different. That's not a good marriage. And that's not the way God wanted us to view it from the very beginning. The foundational principles we gain then from the book of Genesis is, number one, Satan is always trying to undermine God's plan. Number two, nothing can get at a man's heart quicker than his wife, and vice versa. And the reason is because of that phrase, when Adam saw Eve and she was presented to him by God, his phrase was, bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. She came from him. She was a part of him. They came from the exact same stuff and substance that God had made. And because of that kind of connection and God saying these two shall be one, New Testament gives us tremendous parallels to the design theory in Genesis. And that is that what God's joined together, don't let anyone divide asunder. A man should love his wife as Christ loved the church, which means a sacrificial love. A woman should love her husband and be subservient. I don't think it says that, but that's the context and the concept of marriage, is that we're not really good alone. We're better together. Verse in Ecclesiastes just juxtaposes someone walking along as opposed to someone walking with another. And it says it's better for two to walk together than for one to walk alone. Let that verse give a picture of marriage and you get the original design concept. Because it says if one is walking alone and he falls, he has no one else to pick him up. But if he's walking with someone and he falls, he has the other to pick him back up. What a wonderful illustration of marriage that ought to offer to all of us, because all of us are going to stumble. Everybody's going to fail. Everybody's going to go through a dark place. One of the great rewards of a good marriage is that when you stumble, he or she doesn't leave and run. When you stumble, he or she stays and helps you get back up and get back going in the direction you should be going. That's the original design. That's the foundation that God meant for us to build our marriages on. And then number three, we discover that if we break the covenants of God, we forfeit our purity and our joy as they did in the garden. So a summary of Genesis on marriage is that one, it's between man and woman. And two, they have to communicate. They have got to communicate to keep each from going astray. Number three, they have to acknowledge that this is God's will. You can do everything in this garden except. That's where they have to come to agreement on. Number four, they will face temptations against the design. And number five, they will suffer loss if they deviate from God's plan. So that's the foundation in Genesis, and that concludes session 1 of 7. And our second session, will be on discovering the reasons why we marry. You don't have to go away. I just had to have some water. Session 2. Session 2 of 7, the reason we marry. We marry for one reason and one reason only. And it's this word. We marry for intimacy. We've already looked at the design plan in Genesis. And the design plan in Genesis didn't say anything about Adam needs somebody to help him hoe the garden. Or Adam is not doing a very good a job of naming the animals. I'm going to have to give him someone smarter and brighter than him to help name the animals. All we get is that he looked at this woman and said, "Bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh." He recognized that God's concept was what he lacked was not the ability to work and name animals and whatever else God wanted him to do. What he lacked was an intimate companion, and God provided that in Eve. The problem with intimacy is that we don't know how to define it. Years ago, many years ago, when I used to do marriage seminars 20 years or so ago, I would pass out a piece of paper now and then, or I'd give them as couples came in. And I would, at this point in the seminar, I would ask a man to write down a definition of intimacy, and every wife write down a definition of intimacy. And it was always humorous after the first. I didn't know what to expect the first time. After the first time, I did it on purpose in seminars because it was always humorous. Men would write and they'd lay the pen down after about 2 seconds. Lay the pen. Women would be, and that's because they looked about like this. Typically, men would just write sex. That's intimacy. And some men would be creative and they'd throw another word in like lingerie or something that didn't make a lot of sense. But women always got something else out of the word. It was always something more emotional. It was trust. It was security. It was comfort. It was making me feel better, making me feel okay, and so they had to think to write those things out. So I didn't have room on the screen. I just shortened it to her definition is consideration and thoughtfulness and trust and kindness and loyalty and warmth, and we just stop there. So now it's important to get this concept, because I'm going to show you a little diagram on the screen, but it's important to get this concept. If the reason we marry is intimacy and we don't define it the same, we already have a conflict and we already have an obstacle to genuine happiness and eventual success. So it's imperative that we get this point that for a man, by and large, when you think of intimacy and, well, I don't know, I'm married, for whatever, it still comes back to physical embrace, sexual expression. Not so with her. The diagram that you can see on the screen is just to model something here, to make a point. So hang on for the next few screens and get this concept. It literally could revolutionize a marriage if a marriage hasn't grasped this yet. The outer circle, the blue shade, the outer circle, that's just the definition of marriage. The inner circle is the definition of intimacy. Whatever your definition is, I just made it a much smaller concentric circle. So you get the idea. Here's your marriage, and in every marriage there is some level of intimacy. And the point to this illustration is, if I was to tell you how to improve your marriage, I would start with nothing greater than improve your intimacy. But I need to clarify that. So look at this screen and get the idea behind this model. Marriages, every marriage is full of stuff. You didn't marry for any of this stuff. You didn't sit down before you proposed or before you said I will to the guy. You didn't sit down and say, well, first we need a few evenings maybe with our CPA to try to work all this stuff out, because we're going to have school tuitions, we're going to have mortgage payments, we're going to have taxes and joint filing together probably. We need to know which is the best. and we're going to have car payments and insurance. And then if we get pregnant, we're going to have doctor's costs and pregnancies and insurance and that. And we'll probably have to get a bigger house when we have kids. And then when the kids get big, we're going to have cars for them. And that's more, double the rate we're already, and then, so before we get married, we need to, we don't do that. We just think, I love this person loves me, we'll solve it all, and then we get married, and then there it is. It's all there. We have kids, we have careers, we have problems on the job, we have money that has to be spent, we have crises, emergencies, we have things that burn up, we have things that break that have to be replaced, we have computers, oh my gosh, I didn't know they cost $1,500. We have to have it just to pay the bills we can't afford to pay. And all these things come crowding into our marriage. And we have no choice. You can't divorce yourself from the problems of life and joint living. You don't get easier when you marry, you get harder. You don't pay less in rent when you're married, you pay more. You don't pay less for automobiles, you have to have two. So marriage can almost double what it costs to live, because it costs that for each person to live. And so we have to play with this concept for just a moment, because out on the right, you have seen on the screen, I said the smaller the circle, the bigger the problems. Put that in the right context. The point that's being made by the little diagram, the model, is that if your intimacy starts going away and that inner circle starts shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, and you have less and less intimacy, then that means there's more room for problems. They magnify, they get bigger. Now all of a sudden we focus more and more and more on the money and the pains and the problems and all those things. If, however, I can increase the inner circle, the bigger the inner circle, the bigger the intimate circle, meaning the more intimacy you have in marriage, you're still going to have bills and tuitions and taxes and cars and insurance and emergencies and repair. You're still going to have that. But the model on the screen is simply meant to demonstrate how much less of your time, your energy, your brain, your doubt, your depression, how much less of you they consume, the greater the intimacy. It might be a simple model, but now we'll complicate it by doing something to the inner circle. Remember what we said a while ago about the definition of intimacy? So the inner circle, we're going to divide it with a hash line, and now we have his half. Remember, his was just sex, and because I couldn't squeeze all the words in on the other half, I just put emotional bonding on her half. And so now look at the model and accept this idea that our definitions of intimacy are different. They're not bad. His is not wrong and sinful. Hers is not convoluted and crazy. We're entitled to our own definitions from our own points of view, male and female. We're entitled to that. It's what we are. It's how we were designed and how we were made. And so no matter how different our definitions of intimacy is, the only real way to make marriage full of more pleasure and joy and less contingent upon the misery and pain of that outer fringe circle. It is completely dependent on us being willing to accept that our partner's definition is all right. It's theirs. But now it begs us, how do we increase the circle? So the circle in that middle cannot be increased by you, each of us individually demanding that my half of that is answered. In other words, the male side cannot say, well, you're not giving me enough intimacy. And then let's put it on the calendar. Okay, you get Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Will that satisfy you, big boy? And you know, that's not right. That's not going to satisfy you. That's not going to satisfy you because it leaves out Saturday, Sunday, and Thursday. That's not true. You also know that if you just sit down and say, you know, I am not budging another inch, if you're the wife and you say, I'm not budging another inch until you make me feel secure and you pay some bills a little bit better and you become a better manager and take care of our kids a little better. Don't you keep ignoring them and help me in the kitchen and make me. And if you draw the line and put your foot down and say, I will, if you do these things, it doesn't work. What you wind up doing is realizing both of you start becoming rebellious and antagonistic toward the other, and it just doesn't work. And so there's a simple solution, and the solution is this. The only way you can really enlarge the intimate circle in a marriage is if you recognize the concept that you're different in your definition. Your definition is different from your spouse's, accept that. And then if you're willing to say, I can't demand mine is increased, I can only make sure I increase my partner's. So if you're a husband, the only way you're going to make the circle larger is by starting to try to understand her point of view, why she feels the way she does, what she thinks she's missing and lacking in the relationship, and start feeding that and making that grow. The New Testament would have a verse that we can't shy away from, even though modernism tends to want to change wording in the Bible, and there's no need to. There's a verse that says, dwell with your wives according to knowledge and give honor to them as to a weaker vessel. And the scripture's not calling her a weaker vessel. It's calling men to give honor to her in the same way they might give honor to a weaker dish, a fragile a vase. So if you had a fragile vase and you knew, don't bump it, the grandkids come over, you'd put it up on a high shelf because it doesn't take much to break it. And it's valuable and you want to take care of it, so you put it up on a high shelf. Not that we ever do that. But if you did that, then you would understand the meaning of this verse. The verse is not saying she's crackable, she'll break. The verse is saying simply to a man, you want to know how to treat her? Treat her this way. With the same care you would treat a fragile vase, treat her that way. And the reason is God designed us, and He knows the emotional design He put in us is different. I still go back to men were designed to be hunters and providers, and we go out and kill an animal, bring it home, throw it over there, and they cook it. It doesn't work that way, thank God, because I would hate to go hunt for my living. Would have died a long time ago. But that was the original man. That was the concept. And now those patterns and those dynamics don't leave our hearts because we live on concrete floors and drive cars instead of riding horses or mules. So here we are with a man who still thinks very physical. His response to most of life is physical. Boys get in a fight in school, they want to punch and slug it out. Girls want to call each other names and cry and go tell somebody how bad it was. That's not an insult. That's just a difference in nature. At least we hope they still do that. That's just a difference in the dynamic of the way God made us. If you want intimacy to increase and you're the wife, you can only say, that's His point of view. I'm not sure I get it. I'm not sure I understand it, but that's important to Him. That's the way He's made. I can only increase intimacy by giving myself more to Him physically. The New Testament even corroborates with a verse that says, hey, when you're married, your body does not belong to you. It belongs to your spouse. And that brings us back to the physicality of that half of the intimate circle. So here we are with this dilemma, this divided line, two different definitions, but the solution is just this simple right here. All we have to do is he has to give her what she needs in marriage. She has to give him what he needs in marriage. And if we do that, I'll go back to this other picture just so you see. If we do that, then we are expanding that intimate circle, and the more intimacy you have in marriage, and remember, intimacy by his definition or by her definition is all you can increase. But as you're increasing that, of course, the hope is that as you increase her half or his half, yours will also ride along for the ride. As you increase that circle, then the problems that we're all going to have in marriage are still there, but they are so small in your spectrum They take up so little time, they don't become arguments and conflicts and fights. That concludes session 2 of 7. And the next session that we'll turn to is the 5 conflicts of marriage. Session number 3 of 7. Session number 3 is called the 5 conflicts of marriage. It's not like this is an unbendable rule. You may come up with a concept, a problem that doesn't fit one of these. But the purpose for naming 5 areas of conflict and trying to group everything into it, we'll explain a little later in how to win an argument every time. But right now, at this moment, just know this, that it always helps to be able to give a name to a problem or to an enemy. If you start a marriage argument, a spat, over anything, any topic, any subject, and at some point you feel like you're losing the battle, the tendency you have is to just kind of do what we see on Facebook and social media these days, and that's just start insulting your opponent. The only problem with that is your opponent in that battle is your spouse, your husband or wife. And when you start insulting your opponent, you start immediately losing ground. Doesn't matter whether you win the argument anymore or not, you've lost ground, you've lost something very special. It would be much, much better if when we start having discussions that we know might raise our tension level a little, it would just be so helpful if we can let our brains just categorize it and give it a name. Oh, well, what we're talking about is a money problem. See, we're not talking about a stupid wife or a belligerent husband. We're talking about a money problem. That the advantage to giving a name to the conflicts that we fight in every marriage is beneficial if it keeps us from thinking that our partner, our spouse, is our enemy or our opponent. There is no enemy, there's just a problem, and the problem needs to be resolved. And that's what we're kind of hoping this session to be able to do, is by the time we're through with our 7th session, have helped you learn how to argue and how to end things with a successful and positive note. So these 5 categories pretty much lump everything you'll ever fight in marriage into one of them. Number 1 is money, and probably number 1 is right for it. It's probably the most critical thing we will argue over in marriage. It is not because we want to argue, it's because money has a tendency to embarrass us, to shame us. Not money, the lack of money. The lack of money has the ability to shame us, to hurt us. We're embarrassed when we can't pay a bill. We feel in those moments, we feel inadequate. We feel like our spouse is thinking we're inadequate. It doesn't take much of an insult in times when money is short. It really doesn't take much of an insult to send someone into a depression cycle, male or female. And so it should comfort all of us to know that nobody goes into a marriage and doesn't have money problems. Everybody will have discussions over money. Everybody will have to discuss spending habits. Everybody will have to discuss how do we do the checking account? Do we have 1 or 2? Who balances it? Who does this? Who pays this bill? Who pays that bill? How will we do this? And it requires great communication skills to be able to solve money financial problems. And they never go away. They just change. When you're first married, it's just an apartment and utilities and cars and insurance and going and having a good time and food on the table. And then after a while, you get pregnant, and then it's doctors and hospitals and doctors and drugs and hospitals, and then it's loss of work or income if she was working. And so money is just never going to go away. It just changes as you go from stage to stage through life. Number 2 on the screen is sex. We mentioned that briefly in the definition of intimacy, and so it's only fair to mention it here, and we'll mention it again in a moment in one of the other sessions in one of the other categories. But there is probably no greater passion or greater drive than the sex drive, and especially is that true in the male. When you read classic literature, Shakespeare for a good example, Shakespeare made a living off of writing about unrequited love, a passionate, burning, lustful love of a man or a woman for someone else. But 9 times out of 10 when he wrote, he always knew the person most likely to go crazy over it was a man. The Bible didn't leave us silent in that either. We get a lot of laws from Moses regarding a man and his lust. And those laws were severe in the laws of Moses. People were actually punished by death for violating sexual codes and sexual behavior. David himself is a classic example. David was a king of Israel. He was married to Michelle. He was married to, that's what I call it. I think it looks like Michael in the Bible. It was Saul's daughter, Michelle. He was married to Abigail. I don't know how many other wives he had. He had a harem. And yet one day he looked out the window of the palace and there was a woman taking a bath on the roof of her house. And he became so struck with her that instead of just saying to one of his men, go get one of my wives and bring her up to my chambers, he just said, go get her. I want her. And his lust overtook him and his vanity got him, and that drive is just absolutely enormous. Solomon wrote the book of Proverbs to sons who might one day become kings. They were young princes. And writing the book of Proverbs, when you start reading it, you realize he says, my son, take heed to what I'm telling you. My son, listen to this. And man, for about 6 or 7 chapters, he just can't get away from sexual things. Don't be taken with the other woman. Don't be taken with a strange woman. Don't go to prostitutes. That's common. People do that. Don't you do that. You rise above that. And it's like he just felt like, man, they need a lecture, because he never stopped for several of the chapters. He was just constantly going back to that. And if a married couple doesn't recognize the power and the passion and the drive that sexual behavior can have on the human heart, the dynamic of the relationship, then they're going to struggle. Number 3 is family relationships. Big, wide cover. That can mean too much influence from in-laws. That can mean stepchildren from a previous marriage. That can mean an ex-husband or an ex-wife who won't leave you alone. Anybody connected in your family that you have to have a relationship with because you now married into that family, those areas are always there that just constantly have to be worked on. Number 4, religion. If you marry someone who's not of your same faith, good luck. That'll be a tough battle. I know nowadays we're like, well, we're non-denominational. That's not what I'm talking about. If Christians try to marry Jews, which they do, and Christians try to marry, someone from another faith, Muslim or Hindu, it's all right when you're in love with each other and you can make it last and you can make it fun and you can make it exciting. And you may not ever have a problem until a child is born. And when a child is born, all of a sudden our religious connection, our faith starts calling to us. And we want to pass it on to our child. And so when you have completely opposite religions and husband and wife want to both pass their religion and their faith on to a child, the best you can hope for is probably a very confused child. Even if one spouse gave up and said, you raise a child by your faith, I'll just accept it, they're going to hell or whatever you decide, and I'm being maybe a little facetious, but not much. Even if they did that, as the child grows and becomes logical and reasoning and thinking, the child will say, well, why isn't dad? Or why isn't mom like you say we're supposed to be? So it's a very awkward mix. And in the Old Testament, back to the primary design and the foundation of all things, back in the Old Testament, when you read Scripture and Moses encouraging a marriage of kind, he's not talking about race. Race is not a factor in the Bible. No matter what a handful of people are trying to say these days, race is not a factor. But nationality was. Jews were expected to marry Jews, and that was the hope of every Jewish parent, was that this child, Miriam and Aaron, turned against Moses' leadership because he married a woman from Ethiopia. Some people say, and then try to make this a racial thing, that they were upset because Moses married a black woman. There's two things wrong with that premise. Number one, we don't know but what Moses wasn't black. We don't know, he wasn't a white European. So he may have been black. And the color of skin is never named. The other factor that we completely tend to overlook sometimes is their anger and their pride was in the Jewish people. It was the Jewish people that had been rescued from Egypt and now set apart by Moses and being led by Moses. And now he brings his wife from Ethiopia up. She's not a Jew. In fact, he made his grown sons be circumcised, trying to adopt them into the Jewish tribe. So it was just an awkward thing for her. And God punished her for it and didn't want that to be the premise of her or Aaron or anyone else. But it gives us a great peek into mixing a marriage with different religions. And so nowadays in America, pretty much Christian churches are trying to get along better than they ever have before, and maybe largely because non-denominationalism has outgrown every denomination on an individual basis as people move away from austere tradition and just trying to blend together in faith in Christ. But you're going to have conflicts in religion, and you may not have them until a child is born. But when that child is born, it's very important that you and your spouse have agreement in your faith. Number 5, personal habits. You don't know a thing about a person until you marry them. Even if you hang out a lot together ahead of time, we're all masters at hiding our worst flaws. And then we hide them until we're married. It's almost like you flip a switch. We hide them until you're married. I don't think I ever passed gas in a car on any date in my life. But it was like the minute I was married, it was like, okay, now I can't. I probably passed gas the first day after I was married driving back from Galveston because, well, I could. What's she going to do now? She's married to me. You don't know how well a person is with their cleanliness. You don't know if they clean out the dirt between their toes. You don't know if they have horrible foot odor. You don't know if they scratch their belly or other parts. You don't know how anybody is until you're married to them. What you know before you marry is the image they want you to see. And we're good at presenting an image. But after you're married, just hang on, because you're going to have some conflicts over laziness and cleanliness and odors and burping and sounds and attitude and tone of voice and screaming on the highway, road rage. You have no idea what a person's like until you've been married to them for a while. And so it's imperative that you have something really, really strong pulling you together, just in case one or two bad habits emerges after you're married, because those habits that emerge after you're married, they didn't start after you were married. They were just suppressed while you were dating. They're long ingrained in that man or woman. They're long ingrained in there. They just put them on a temporary hiding until while you were dating, until you were married. And so it's hard to break old habits. Sometimes they can be broken. But these are the areas that cause us conflicts. This is where we get all of our arguments. All of them come through this territory right here. And so there are various ways to handle when we start realizing, we're not agreeing on money, sex, family relations, religion, personal habits. There are various ways that we handle that argument. I just threw a couple of things on the screen for your consideration. One is we just try to avoid talking about it and we just let them be whatever they are. The only problem with that is if it's driving us crazy and it really irritates us and we're afraid that if we don't say something, they're never going to change, then you have to resort to really not liking that person for a long, long time, or not liking the way that habit makes you feel. So if you just avoid it and don't ever talk about it, they're going to stay the way they are. You're going to stay not liking the way they are, and you both lose. Second thing on the screen is we compete. We can try to win this argument. I can just get into it with you, and if you don't stop it, I'm going to do this. I mean it. And then we make them stop. But because they were badgered into it, then they resent. So they stop something just to make you happy. And so you got the problem stopped there, but you created a new one you don't see, and that is they resent you. In that, one of you's won, the other one has lost. Or sometimes you win and lose together. And then there's accommodation. If you just accommodate a person, again, you suffer, they win. And then there's compromise where, well, we'll compromise and let's try this, and you do it on Wednesday and we'll do this, and that's okay, except then you always got, well, I win sometimes, he wins other times, and that's not great. And the final one up there is just collaboration. I started to say communication, but I didn't. It's just collaboration, just learning how to communicate and say, this is why. The problem we make, and we're going to discuss that in the next session. I'm going to show you how to argue in the next session. But the problem we make sometimes, collaboration is just a way of saying tit for tat, I suppose. Look, I know you don't think that this is a big deal when you do this, but it bothers me, and here's why it bothers me. And then really have reasoning and logic behind why it bothers you. Because what you're trying to do is not make a person obey you. What you're trying to do is convey to a person a genuine feeling that you have, a genuine thought that you have, a genuine concern. It's really valid. It's a valid thing if it's bothering you, and it needs to be expressed with validity instead of intimidation and argumentativeness, and I'm going to win, and you can't do that anymore. If you just learn to collaborate, if you just learn to say, I want to explain something to you, and then you don't get offensive because they want to explain something, you get to hear it. I'll tell you how not to be offended in the next session. That concludes session 3 of 7. Session 4 of 7 will be how to argue and win, really. All right, session 4 of 7 is called How to Argue and Win. And I thought I needed to put really on there because I know you wouldn't believe that that's possible. But it is possible. It requires a couple of change of definitions. And the first one we'll start with is what an argument turns out to be. Every marriage has conflict. I tried to give you five conflict areas a little while ago, areas in which all of us are going to discuss things that are going to turn into arguments sooner or later. And every marriage will have them. There's just no escaping that. And then inevitably what happens is it becomes a confrontation of wills. I can't believe you don't see my point of view. I can't believe you don't see mine. And we butt heads, and our voices get louder, and our tone gets nastier. And then if you're not careful, we just start attacking each other. And at some point, if somebody could just turn an off switch on and just stop it and say, what do you want to gain out of this? At that point, we would just say, I'm going to win. I'm going to do it my way. And nobody's going to tell me I can't, because that's in our nature, to win. And so that's what happens. We enter this power struggle in marriage, and there's not supposed to be remember the design factor from lesson 1. We were made to be one flesh, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, intimate. And so it's not supposed to be a power struggle, but it is. It becomes one. So I got to redefine something for you. And that's the word argument. Every time we start arguing about a conflict, if it becomes a power struggle, it's because we think an argument must be won. It's a clash, and you have to win it. You got to win the argument. But what if we redefined what an argument is? It's not a power struggle, a struggle to victory, a struggle to prove my point and overcome him or her. What if we just redefine the word argument? All an argument is a vehicle in which we both get to state our points of view. She gets to say this from her point of view, no matter how dumb I think it is, because I'm a man. And then I get to say it from my point of view, and she has to listen because I listen to hers, no matter how dumb she thinks it is, because I'm just a man. And then that's it. How are you going to learn what your spouse really thinks and what they are in any other format than an argument if you define argument as just that? This is how I learn her point of view. His point of view is an argument. It's not a power struggle. Nobody's going to win a power struggle. When you win a power struggle, you lose. You may win your point. You lose intimacy. That circle that was in the middle starts closing up on your half, and you're not going to keep his half alive or her half alive either. So when you win a power struggle with your spouse, you lost. Even though you won, you lost. So let's lay a little foundation here for this lesson. You got to redefine the word argument. It is not a power struggle that demands to be won. It is a chance to voice my opinion. This is what I'm seeing. This is what I think is happening. This is what I'm afraid is going to continue going. That's number one. Number two is you got to stick to the I rules, 2 I rules. I don't know why I ever wrote that, 2 I's. That's not the kind of I I'm talking about, the letter I. 2 I rules. If you could just practice this on social media, you would be a genius these days. But we don't care about social media as much as we care about your marriage. And in that marriage, the minute you enter that power struggle, instead of a chance to discuss and get my point of view out, if you start losing, the natural tendency is calling each other names. Stupid, idiot, creep, tyrant, bully. You just, man, those are the nice ones. You know the bad ones. You can just spew them out whenever you're afraid you're about to lose your point and you're afraid you're about to lose that power struggle that shouldn't be a power struggle. You start insulting. The simplest way to not insult is to remember the other I. Stick with the issue. What's the issue? Well, I gave you 5 of them in an earlier section. Money, sex, personal habits, religion. What was the other one? Anybody know? Money, sex, family. Oh yeah, family relationships. So that's the issue. We're talking about the bill. No, yeah, but we're talking about money. The issue here is how we're managing our money. The issue is not, you're stupid. That's an insult. And the issue is not addressed in that. All that happens there is I'm still trying to win something, and if I can't win it on logic, I'll win it on insults and badgering. But when you win that way, you lose. Can't win that way. So the simplest way I know how to express this is in these 2 I rules. You just have to stick with the issue at hand and put a zipper on your lip before you ever start hurling insults at your spouse. And then number 3 is, and I've taught this for so many years, I don't know if anybody gets it anymore or not. I think when I first wrote this 35 years ago probably, I was probably on some committees somewhere, and we used Robert's Rules of Order. And if you're familiar with Robert's Rules of Order, anybody can bring something up in your business meeting, but at some point you realize it wasn't on the agenda, or if it was on the agenda, we're not going to resolve it tonight, and it's just a gentleman's agreement sort of thing. Somebody can say, I move we table that until next week. And somebody else says, I agree. I second that. And the chairman will say, so done, we're tabling this discussion on why he can't pay his bills until next Wednesday, or whatever the topic is. I've only had one family over the years actually contact me and say, that thing really helped us. That one right there really helped us because we quit arguing. We just realized we didn't have to solve it tonight. And that's what tabling it does for you. if you both can just accept and embrace this concept, then when you start that argument, which is what? Just a chance to hear both sides, he said, she said, and you know you don't have to fix it tonight because that would mean somebody had to win right now, then you're arguing with no urgency to resolve it right now. And at some point, somebody can just say, I hear what you're saying. I appreciate it. I understand that. I get your point of view. Can we talk about this again in a couple of nights? You'd be surprised how much advantage you gain to get away from the moment and moods it might create in us and the fear that we're just caving in to something we don't want to do. You'd be surprised the advantage to being permitted to just say, let's just talk about it again Wednesday. I don't know why Wednesday, that's just a day comes to mind. But the advantage is now we agree to just step away and our moods can relax and our tension can go away for a moment and nobody lost and nobody won. But now, over the course of the next few days, you get to assimilate what he or she said. You get to really think about it and ruminate on it, meditate, it's ruminate. You get to bring it back up like a cow brings up the cud. I don't know, that's not a good illustration, I don't care. You get to chew on it some more while you're driving to work or while you're in the bathroom or while you're taking a break at work and you're just doodling. You get to think about what the other person said. And that's what we miss in our arguments is we don't have time to think and reflect. So you really need to learn this sometimes above all things. Just don't think that every argument has to be resolved right now. Learn to struggle it. Learn to table it. And then finally, I don't know what this has any value to do with anything. It's just a way to try to express something, but I put it up here and call it the vowel formula, A-E-I-O-U. And I just put 5 statements up here, trying to memorize them or remember them from that. It's just a way of saying, number one, emphasize this in your brain. Don't ever enter an argument with your spouse and think it's going to turn out negative. I know this is going nowhere, but I'm going to tell you anyway. Well, okay, you just gave me permission to go nowhere with you. You got it? You got to assume there's going to be a positive outcome. Start any discussion between you and your spouse believing you can arrive at positive things. And if you preface it by saying, I know you're tired of hearing me and you don't want to listen anymore and you never do what I say, but, well, you just tuned me out completely. Assume there's the reason it's important to say this is because if you don't start an argument without thinking, first of all, there's got to be a positive outcome, guess what you just did? You started thinking, what could that positive outcome be? And when you start thinking there could be a positive outcome, it changes your tone, it changes your approach, it changes your language, changes the way you bring it up because you could arrive at something positive. Why just assume the negative about our spouses? Why just know, like all the time before, it's just going to be a fight? Well, it's going to be now, for sure. Why not assume something better can happen and assume it first before you ever speak, and then it'll help you frame the right words. And then E is express clearly, don't beat around the bush. I don't know about other husbands, I can only speak for myself, but I can tell you I don't take hints and nuance at all. I don't even like TV shows that require me to think. If I have to think, I won't watch it. If it's not blowing up a building or shooting guns, I probably won't last very long. And if I have to think psychologically and mentally too much, that's not entertainment for me sometimes. It is for others, I'm sure. But E, express yourself clearly means don't assume your spouse will know what you're talking about when you're beating around the bush. I don't want to bring up something delicate. Well, then don't bring it up. Well, you've already used language that starts assuming we're angry, we're going to not react well to you. Assume you're going to have a positive outcome. Frame the words carefully. Don't leave it to nuance and hint. Say it. The I is identify common goals. That's believing you can come to a positive outcome. So how can you do it? It's going to have a commonness between you. You both got to win something. Offer your solution. Back to the A. You already assumed it'd be positive. Offer a positive solution. And then the U is, and when you do all this framework, remember that sex and intimate bond, always frame it in the context of what your spouse is made of, not your context. Frame that in the needs of your spouse. And when you do that, when you remember, I'm never going to have a power struggle with my wife or my husband. I'm never going to try to win the argument. An argument is just a chance for both of us to talk, number one. Number two, I'm going to remember to stick with the issue and never insult. And number three, we're going to always argue knowing we do not have to solve this right this moment. We can put it off. If it's an urgent thing that needs an answer tomorrow, hey, you still don't have to solve it right now. Let's take an hour. We've heard it. We've put it out on the table. Let's just take a break. Here's a good idea. Go separate rooms and pray about it for a few minutes. Go get some ice cream and think about it. Go out in the garage and putter around. Sit in the backyard for a while separate. Anything to give your brain a moment to assimilate. Table it. Don't feel the urgency to resolve every argument with a win, because you can't. But you can if you do it this way. And then the fourth thing is just remember to assume that you'll have a positive outcome and express yourself clearly and identify a commonness. You both have got to win in this, so offer a solution that'll let both of you win. And when you do that based on an understanding of your spouse's need, you'll win, and you can win, both of you win, every time you argue. That's the conclusion of session 4 of 7, and the next session 5 of 7 is how to sustain or improve a sexual relationship. This is session 5 of 7, and it is how to sustain or improve the sexual relationship in marriage. We've already established a couple of things in previous sessions. One is that we are meant to be intimate, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, Adam called Eve. She was made for his intimate needs. He didn't require her to till the garden and name the animals. That's just figurative language in the Bible to show that he didn't make her to be a partner like, a couple of mules hooked up to a yoke. He made her to be the filler of something he needed. It is not good for man to be alone. He made a woman. It wasn't good for her to be alone. He made her for him. So he made the two of us needing each other. And then we discover through the Old Testament scriptures, we get so many classic examples. Solomon falling in love with David with Bathsheba, Solomon falling in love with a Shulamite girl, a slave girl that had been captured by his army and brought back to Jerusalem. And he's passionately in love with her, but she's not in love with him. She's in love with her shepherd lover back home, and Solomon, the king. And he can't make her love him. And he writes an entire discourse over how much he was sick with love and his heart was aching, in all those wonderful illustrations. The power and dynamic. The New Testament even gives us the same thing, maybe even better and clearer language. Paul makes a statement in the New Testament in Corinthians. He says, adding and building on other marriage concepts in the New Testament. And then he says, nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife. Now, that seems like an awkward way of saying, hey, just so you won't mess around sexually, you can get married. He wasn't saying so you won't mess around. He was saying, let's acknowledge something here. Christian or not, you're driven by a huge passion. You are driven by sexual passion. You need a woman, and you need her physically, physiologically. And so rather than trying to be like me, Paul said, I wish everybody was like me, but everybody can't be. Paul meaning unmarried. And so Paul was saying, rather than try to be like me, it might not be your cup of tea. And rather than you winding up trying to be something you're not supposed to be, and then winding up falling into sin, it'd be better for you to go ahead and say, I need to get married. And not because you're so passionate you just can't control yourself, but because you weren't made to be celibate, as Paul must have believed he was. Paul believed he was and said so. And so that's what we're going to talk about briefly. Remember when we talked about the circle in the middle, and that you could only increase hers and she could only increase yours. That's kind of where we are with this. And so on the intimate circle that was divided with a dotted line, and she has to increase his half and him her, I put a few things on the screen just so you can read and follow along. For a wife, it simply means that if you want to increase his circle of intimacy, you have to be his partner in sex. And I know it sounds funny. It seems, to see the word on the screen is kind of like weird. Not his victim. But sometimes it's a bad word, perhaps, but sometimes a man can feel like that's pretty much what his wife is. I guess a better term would be accommodating. No man wants to be accommodated. No, this is about love and passion and romance. This don't accommodate me and say, you can have Tuesday. No, thank you. We not only won't have Tuesday, we won't have Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or Sunday either. You have to be a partner with that. It doesn't matter if your tastes are similar or dissimilar, but it does matter that you recognize you will never increase intimacy in that circle for him unless you become his partner, not his accommodator. Number two, don't criticize his sexual needs and appetite and him maybe always handsy and wanting to touch you and do other things. Don't ever mock that and criticize it and leave the impression that there's something wrong. There's something wrong with you. That's not wise for you to say, because that's his design. He was made needing a woman. God made him, and God didn't make a mistake and then later say, I might have messed up. This is all God's grand design. He knew what he was going to do from the very beginning. He established it that way on purpose so that we would understand man was independent, live alone, do all the things God wanted him to do. And then God said, I'm going to make something for him, because he's not complete alone. So don't mock the part of him that's made the way 5,000 years of history has shown this is what man does. Number three, don't reject him, but communicate with him. Now, we're still talking about his half of that circle. And one of the greatest flaws that we all get into in the sexual aspect of marriage, and the reason we don't sustain it over a long haul, is because he makes too many advances. It's like, oh my goodness, does he ever not want sex? Probably not. From the time he was about 12 years old, he has known that he is a sexual being. Physiologically, anatomically, he has known that he's a sexual being from the time he was 11, 12 years old. And if you parents are worried and any kids are watching, this is absolutely not risque. We're keeping it above board and nothing they won't have heard probably in school or TV. What we're trying to talk about is a biblical premise for why we are like we are and why we get into trouble in marriage and don't sustain over the long haul the pleasure of our company, our intimacy. So if a man makes advances to his wife, it is true that probably 99 times out of 100, he intends for it to go elsewhere. You hear a wife now and then criticize, well, he never touches me unless he wants more. Oh, that's how wanting more starts. See, he can't not touch you and want more. He can't say, he's not going to say, hey, I don't want anything, but I would like to just reach over and kind of cuddle you. That would be kind of foolish. So he's just going to cuddle, and then he might want more, but the only way you can know is to see what happens. And so sometimes when you're not in the mood and he is, the reaction, the way you want to stop it as a wife is just rejection. Push away, not tonight, have a headache, got to get up in the morning, whatever. And that's all right, that's fair game. The problem is, if you do that a lot, after a while, you'll start noticing in marriage, he approaches you less and less and less. And it doesn't matter how innocent and subtle your rejection is, if it's still a rejection, if it's just blowing your breath and jerking a hand, that's a rejection. He got it, he's not stupid, he got the hint, he'll leave you alone. But there's a breakdown in the male anatomical, physiological psyche that would be wonderful if wives just kept in mind. Remember, we'll talk about him in a minute to you, because right here on this screen, we're splitting the circle. The left half of the circle is over there, and we're talking about that now. Right half's over there. So here's the thing. Physiologically, anatomically, you get it, I think. When he is in the mood, he is in the mood physically and anatomically. It's there. It's hormonally driven and it's blood pounding. And then comes the rejection, no matter how good it might be, necessary. Got things to do, too much on my mind, headache, got to get up in the morning, whatever. But nonetheless, when the rejection comes, it's an easy thing for the non-hormonally driven partner to just stop and say, no, whatever. But what you don't realize is that behind your back, there's an anatomical problem. It's not going away in a moment. The passion's not going away. The drive is not going away. It takes a while for the heartbeat to slow down, the blood to finally go back out of a muscle, and the entire process of physical letdown results in a lot of bitterness and resentment and anger over not being understood and not having a reason to reject. Because it's not like he just, okay, never mind, turn over, turn the light off, bling, whatever. No, there's a physical reaction that must take a process of time. And then if like 10 minutes later, you suddenly think, oh, I probably was rude in the dark, and you reach over and kind of want to be a cuddle buddy, guess what? He had to play a mental trick to kind of make everything go away. He had to make his mind, make his body and his heart and the pound, I don't mean his heart emotion, I mean the muscle. He had to play a mental game to turn the lust off, to turn the drive off, to turn the need off. He had to play a mental game in bed in the dark. He had to convince himself, don't need it, don't care, don't want it, it's okay, no problem, not angry. And it finally goes away. And if 15 minutes later you roll over kind of cuddly because you kind of thought about it later, it's too late. It requires too much physical, anatomical energy, heart, blood, mood, attitude. It won't reoccur in the same way as when the man was driven. And so that doesn't mean you have to say yes every time he's in the mood. That's why you see the ellipsis and communicate. No man wants to be a tyrant sexually over his wife, nor does he want to be rejected without knowing why. Is it about me? Do I stink? Is it my odor? What? Is something wrong? Did I say something wrong? Every man who has a passion toward his spouse, and then his spouse is not going to return that passion, needs to know why. It just needs to be expressed. It needs to be expressed kindly and lovingly. It needs to be expressed with a hug or an embrace. It can be expressed. It doesn't have to be rejection, but that's what it most likely and most often is. And what happens is the man never verbalizes what I just verbalized and says to the wife, you're killing me. You're making me play mental tricks and turning myself off, and I fear the day's going to come that I can't even turn myself back on. That's in the man's brain. That's in his thinking. So you got that. That's his half. We'll leave that and let you sit on that for a while, and we'll move over to the other side of the page. Men, here's what it means for you to enlarge the intimacy circle we described earlier. It means that you can't start something in the bedroom when the light goes out and expect it to just translate into, I love you, and you're my favorite sunshiny person. I don't think there's anybody in my world better than you. That's great. That's the way you feel for that moment. But she doesn't feel that way if during the course of the whole day or the whole week or the whole month, she's been talked to like she's stupid, and she's been scolded, and she's been lectured, and she's been fussed at, and she's felt insecure and felt embarrassed in public and all those things. So here's some simple things for men to understand that is imperative to keep the long sustenance of intimacy alive in a marriage. Number one, improve your listening skills. Listen. I know. Remember the screen we put up a while ago where we defined intimacy? And I said I used to pass the paper out 30 years ago when I did seminar 20. And men would react, yeah. That's the way any man's response was. No matter what I asked men to respond in, they were always the shortest route possible. Duh, duh, duh. Yep. And women like to embellish the story a little bit. Yeah, 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 yeah. Any of you men ever watched, you can't raise your hand because nobody can see you, but any of you men ever watch a Hallmark movie, and while you're watching it with your wife, please tell me you only watch them because your wife's in the room. And when you're watching it with your wife, you sit there, you'll never put it in words, but you sit there and you say, a woman wrote this. Because first of all, no man that you know would ever say that many words in anything, in any topic, trying to explain the sunset. Yeah, I don't care if he's reading a book of poetry, he's probably not really going to do that. And even then, you know what I'm talking about. You guys know that the wordiness you see from the characters in romance movies almost always make you think, I bet a woman wrote this, because men wouldn't say that. Men wouldn't say that much. So I don't know, if your experience is the same as mine or not. I know this, it's a provable, measurable fact that women talk more than men. My wife and I were watching one of the game shows recently, Common Knowledge. Common Knowledge. And one of the topics, I think that's the right show, because one of the topics required them to guess how many more words does a woman speak in a day than a man. And I was surprised that was a public conversation topic. And I think both of us picked some numbers. I thought, I don't remember now, but I think I probably said something like, 500 words a day. My wife said something like 100, whatever. And the number was like astronomical. It's like 2,000 more words a day or 5,000 more. It's a huge number more. I don't know who counted these words. I don't know how they arrived at that. It was just a game show. I'm not going to hold that up as fact. The point I'm trying to make is it doesn't matter how many words more she speaks than you. If you really want her to respect you and appreciate you and value you over long years of marriage, you got to start improving your ability to listen when she starts talking. You have to learn to listen. Number two, you got to share the home load. I know how we do this when we first get married. The garage is mine, the house is yours. Yeah, except that every time you walk in that house, you're picking up a plate, you're putting your underwear on the floor, you're setting the glass down on the coffee table, you're eating out of a plate. I mean, you make a mess in every room you walk in. And typically, she doesn't walk in your garage. Well, I say typically, I'm just going to leave it there. Typically, she doesn't walk in your garage and make a mess in your garage. She typically doesn't do that. I mean, my wife might store some Christmas decoration there, but it's cute. God bless her, it's sweet. But she doesn't come out there and mess with your tools, and she doesn't mess things up in your garden with your tools, and she doesn't mess up but you do the house. You poop in the toilet, and sometimes you don't clean the bowl out, and you know it needs to be cleaned. Somebody clean it. Who do you think somebody is? Clean it. Don't throw your clothes on the floor and wait on her to pick them up. And don't leave a glass on the coffee table because you just know the fairy will come in and move it, and all those kind of things. It's something, I don't know why. This is one reason I like the idea of leaving mother and father from the Genesis account, and they had no mother and father, so it sets the dynamic of you need to be an independent person. You need to already be learning to take care of yourself. A boy that never washed his own clothes, washed his own dishes, cooked his own dinner, cleaned his own room, done his own stuff, is probably not going to make a good spouse or a companion. We have to learn to share the load in life. The older you get, the easier it gets. I will tell you that. It's a lot easier for me now than it was when I was young, because my brain kept thinking all the stuff I need to go do at the computer and in the car and whatever. But as you get older, you also can change the dynamic of your brain a little bit, and you don't start thinking so much as, I just want her to know I respect her and value her. You get old like me, you start thinking, she might die one day, I better make sure I know how to turn the stove on. That's not a good illustration. I'm sorry I even said that one. I'll say it for her. He may die one day. I better make sure I know how to, well, never mind, I do everything anyway. You got it. Number 2, share the home load. Number 3, you need to be in acceptance of her emotions. Don't mock her emotions. Don't criticize them. Don't shame her because she'll cry over something you won't cry over. That's the way she was made by God. She brings that aspect into you. You weren't made to have to worry about that stuff. Mentally, emotionally, we don't have any record you even had emotions until she was made. First time we see anything endearing from Adam is when he said, bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh, this woman is me. And so that was the first act of embracing anything we see is when that happened. And so I simply say that to say we're all made in God's plan. And God's plan, as we can tell, was for her to be much softer, gentler, kinder, and much more of a mediator than you are. It's one of the reasons that the Virgin Mary doctrine was taken a little out of context by the Catholics, and God bless them. I love them. But nonetheless, the idea of praying to Mary because she might be able to intercede between us and an angrier God is not biblical. It's not right theology. But we get the idea why they thought so and why they wanted to. Because the mother, the woman, the wife, she's always more tender-hearted than the man. And we should accept that and understand that emotion is not a weakness and a failure. Remember Paul writing to us about deal with her, treat her as you would a fragile vessel. And so we should learn that their hearts break a little easier than ours do. Their emotions get a little more wrapped up in things than ours do. And it's not a fault and a weakness, it's design. So we need to learn to embrace it and accept it. And then number 4, we need to increase. Yep, that's a typo on the screen. We need to increase. Put a C in that increase. We need to increase non-sexual intimacy. I'll change that word, intimacy. We need to increase non-sexual touching. We need to increase non-sexual communication. We need to increase non-sexual kindness. In other words, we should not wait until it's bedtime before we put on a nice tone of voice. Hey, what you doing? Where you at? You fixing to go to bed? That's the wrong time of day to put on your first nice voice of the day. We need to learn how to speak spirit-soothing words, kind words, encouragement, and that sort of thing needs to become part of our habit in treating our wives that way instead of just something we put on a few minutes before bedtime. And so, we'll look at, I don't know if I think that was a mistake screen. So we'll look at 6 ways to make a spouse feel special. This is not just her half and his half, this is both of us. Number 1, I did this in a seminar, and I can't remember how long ago the last time I did it. And I did it because I was running out of things to do, and I just thought this would be funny, but everybody will get it, but at least it'll do. And I had everybody that came into a seminar all got a little piece of paper that had things on it for later, numbered blanks. And when I came to one session similar to this, I said, all right, you see number 12 there, that blank line? No looking right now. Look right up here at me. Don't look at anybody else. Look right up here at me. And all I want you to write in that, probably 15 couples in that seminar, and I said, all I want you to write in that blank right there on number 12, don't look over at your partner. Don't look anywhere. Look right down at the paper. Right now, what color are your spouse's eyes? How hard is that? I mean, everybody knows the color of their spouse's eyes: brown, blue, green, hazel, black, whatever. You know the color of your spouse's eyes. And I kid you not, it was the first time I'd ever put that question on, and I don't even know why I put it in other than I was just trying to fill in a blank on another lesson. And I stood there watching them, and I literally saw a couple of men hesitate and then try to glance over. And I saw a couple of women do like this. Might have even said, don't look, don't look. And sure enough, when I said, all right, let's don't erase them, just call them out. Let's see if you got them right. Tell each other. And there were like 4 women in there about to slap their husbands. He didn't know the color of my eyes. And that did surprise me. I honestly figured everybody would know. So I'm asking you're at home, you might have already looked around, but I'm asking you, do you know the color of your spouse's eyes? And if you have to go look again and you're not sure, you know what that tells you about you? You never look in their eyes. You don't look at them. You look around them. You look past them. If you even look that direction, you don't really look. Now, this day and age, I don't mind telling you, I know it's easy to marry somebody and not know what they look like because you've never seen them. This is what we do right here. And this is how we talk. Uh-huh. And the kids need to do what? Right. Well, won't you take care of that, okay? Yeah, no, just whatever you think needs to be done, that's fine. Just take care of it. Sure, yeah. We marry people and don't know what they look like. And you can absolutely spend years with a spouse, grow into a habit of not really communicating, not talking, not listening, not looking in their eyes. And so it may sound like an innocuous point, but I challenge you to try to start really looking at your spouse when you're having a conversation with them. You go to dinner, you both get on your phones, you chat on your phones, you check news, you look at Facebook, then you eat, you talk, you never really look. You don't know sometimes what your spouse is looking like. Look at the eyes and show genuine intent to listen and learn. Number 2, praise the accomplishments and efforts. Don't just criticize your spouse for things they do wrong. And trust me when I tell you, I know the natural dynamic of anything is we only see the damage. I know that. As an employer, if I come up and see something wrong, I don't see all the right stuff, I see the one thing wrong. We've got a groundskeeper who would say, amen, because when I pull into the grounds, if I see something not right, that's the first thing I see and the last thing I see, and I don't see how good the grounds look over here and how great the fence looks over there and how the gate's working right and the sign. All I see is the wrong thing, and then I'll make a phone call and say, need to take care of this, need to take care of this, because it's not right, and that's the way we are. You go shopping for a car, a used car, you see a dent on it, that's all you can see. There's a dent. You don't see it, low mileage, one owner, in great, you just see the dent. That's kind of the way we do sometimes with our spouses. We just see the problems they're causing us. We see the things they break. We see the pain. Oh my gosh, again? Are you going to do it? And we never compliment the things that they do well and the things they do right. We just don't. It's not because we're mean, it's because it's just a habit you have to set to do that. Number 3, defend the honor of your spouse. Now, I put faults on there as a negative thing. Don't defend your spouse's faults. Just be silent. I've heard people say, and I'm welcome to be wrong on this, I've been argued with on it before, I'll defend my wife, I don't care if she is wrong. Well, I won't defend mine if she's wrong, and I don't want her to defend me if I'm wrong. But I don't want her to shame me in front of somebody because I'm wrong, and I won't do that to her in front of someone if she's wrong. You're not supposed to defend, 2 people sinning doesn't make, 2 negatives make a positive. No, they don't. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. But what happens a lot of times is we just don't defend the honor of our spouse. You got to love your spouse no matter what they are, what they're doing, what they got involved in. You got to love your spouse. You got to love them enough to defend their honor, and then love them enough to try to fix the things that are not right. One of the classic examples I saw in my own family of this was my mother went through a change of life, for lack of a better description. I don't know what she went through. We think that's probably what it was. But when I was probably in, I'm going to say maybe the 5th grade, something like that. I was 10 or 11, if that old. My mother just flipped 180 degrees. She went from the sweetest, nicest woman to a bully tyrant over my sister, especially not so much over me. She just ignored me. I might as well not to have been in the room. It was not mother, but it was. And I don't know, to this day, nobody will ever know what happened to her. I know that she just went through some horrible emotions. And then one day I came home from school and all I heard was moaning in the living room. I ran around the kitchen and my sister was curled up in a ball on the floor, and my mother had a dowel rod, a big wooden dowel rod, and my mother was beating my sister curled up in a ball. And it was a horrible thing to see. I didn't know what to do. I was 10 or 11. I charged my mom and literally tackled her from behind. I just charged and knocked her off my sister. And I grabbed my sister, who seemed semi-conscious to me. She's about 3 or 4 years older than me, 3 years, I think. And I just grabbed her blouse under her armpits, and I just started trying to back out of the room, and I'm dragging her to her bedroom. And laid on the floor in there crying, put foot against the door, traumatized by her mom. She didn't bother us, nothing else happened, but when my other sister came over that day, she was already grown and gone, an apartment of her own. She saw what had happened, heard what had happened, and decided that she was gonna let my sister move into her apartment with her. But they needed to talk to my dad first, and so they got in the car, and I got in the back seat, and my sister's in the front, drove to where my dad works and had a security guard bring him out. And my dad came out and squatted down at the driver's door window. Dirty man, you know, he worked warehouses and he had dirt on his hands, and he was just, he didn't know it was an emergency. They came to get him, so he's squatting down in the sun and, "What's up, girls?" And so they start crying and I don't know, I'm a boy and I don't know all that stuff they're talking about. And they start explaining to Dad what Mom has done and what she's done about this and she's done about that. And the solution is take my younger sister and let her move in with her. And to this day, it's burned in my memory. My dad reached his hand up at one point behind the driver sister, my oldest sister, reached his hand up behind her head and kind of scruffed the nape of her neck and her hair. And he said, "Girls, all I can do, and the only way I know to say it, is to say it this way: don't judge your mom for something she's going through. This is not your mom, not the way she's always been. This is not the woman we know. She's going through something. If she's going through it, it means she's going to get through it. She's going to be like she's always been someday. Right now, don't judge her for what she's going through." And I watched him massage the back of her neck with tears rolling down his face outside the window, begging the girls to just not judge Mom and find a way. My dad came home from work that evening. Dad came home from work, and to make my sister feel more comfortable, he literally brought some blankets and made a pallet to lay in front of her bedroom door and slept on the floor in front of her door, just to make her feel safer against the woman he was telling them, "Don't judge her for what she's going through, love her." And I got to watch that play out. Mom snapped. Something happened. She came back to being the mom we always knew. Didn't take long, maybe 5 or 6 months of losing her. And we look back now, we didn't go to doctors and we didn't take medicine. So most likely my mom was at change of life. Her hormones were failing and quitting, and the mind was doing crazy things. And that was it. But I learned a great lesson, and that is that my father didn't apologize for Mom's faults, but he did defend her honor. And that's the point of this. Your wife, your husband's not always right. Your wife's not always right. Don't be stupid and just get in somebody's face. You don't tell my wife. If your wife or husband was wrong, just let them be wrong. But remember to defend the honor. That person is the person you loved when you married, and it's very possible to defend the honor and not go along with bad choices and bad mistakes. Separate those two things and never quit defending with honor the honor of the person you married. Number 5, don't get in the habit of habitually correcting. Did I skip number 4? Number 4, share a private joke or an inside knowledge now and then. Hey, once in a while you need to just share funny things that you won't go in nowhere else. I don't know about y'all, but for my wife and I, we talk about our kids a lot, and we don't want it ever getting out. Oh, no, that's not true. No, one of my kids here is why I'm saying that. They said that the reason, I don't know if you ever watched David Letterman back when he had a show, but I read one time a little story about him and why he was so successful. And he was described this way. They said one of the reasons Dave Letterman's humor worked so well and lasted so long was because Dave Letterman had a way of convincing the audience that they were in on the joke with him. That he never came in and told his one-liners and his jokes in a way to make it look like his audience was dumb. They're too stupid to get it. You know what I mean? Come on, laugh, somebody. he always made it like it's me and you talking about them. And so he made his audience feel that he and they were already in on the joke that he's kind of telling. And that's why they said his humor and his style of it lasted forever. That's kind of the way you need to be with your spouse. You need to get on the same wavelength with them and share those private, funny things and those intimate moments that are meant for nobody else. You know that saying, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas? That ought to be kind of the way we are sometimes. What happens in this home stays in this home. And that just needs to be because you can communicate openly and without fear that it's ever going to be blabbed and told by the other. Number 5, don't get in the habit of correcting your husband all the time. Just don't. Don't get in the habit of telling your wife she's stupid and here's the way it is. Don't do that. Just don't. It doesn't matter if they start telling a story and they got a couple of facts wrong. It will be a whole lot less noticeable if they just tell the story and finish it and everybody chuckles, ha, 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 than it will be if you start saying, no, it was red, it wasn't blue. No, there were 4 of them, not 3 of them. Nobody cares about the details, but they will care that you never let him finish or you never let her get through it because you just had to make sure you were telling it all right. Sometimes we do it without meaning to. Sometimes we do it, like my political point of view is better than his or hers. So here's the, man, I don't know how some marriages are surviving right now with social media being what it is and husbands and wives having different opinions on social media. Hopefully when they get home, none of that's ever brought up and we just leave it alone. Don't habitually correct your spouse. And then number 6, once in a while, you ought to surprise your spouse with something that you know he or she wants. I'm not talking about something that has to cost a lot of money. There's a subtle point behind number 6. The only way you can surprise somebody with something that they might want is if you get to know them well enough, you know what they would want. I've done this in marriage seminars over the past years where I just, like the eyes a while ago, what color her eyes, I've asked, what is your spouse's favorite color? You'd be surprised how many wrong answers are on that. And it's no big deal, but it's like, they don't know. They really didn't know. My granddaughter and I got to take a trip to Las Vegas, just the 2 of us, for my 70th birthday, is that right? 70th birthday and her 21st birthday. And it was her idea, and I loved it. It's the best trip I've had maybe ever. We just had a great time. But when we got there, our habits are different. She's a girl, I'm a guy. And so I'm not going to talk about hers, but I will tell you mine. I traveled for a while, flew a lot of miles to seminars in 22 states, and I don't know how many cities in those states for, just miles and miles and miles and miles, always packed and ready to go. So when I got to Vegas, I opened my carry-on suitcase, and I've got 3 or 4 shirts and 3 or 4 pants, and they're all on hangers, and I pop them right out of there. They're folded just right, fluff them up, hang them in there. Shirt, pant, shirt, pant, shirt, pant. That's the way I travel. I'm done. I'm ready to go in 5 minutes or so. And my granddaughter walked by, and she stopped and did a double take and looked back, and she said, I'm going to guess blue is your favorite color. I didn't even pay attention to it. I had a blue pinstripe there, another blue pinstripe, a blue solid, another blue with a little pattern in it. They're all blue. I didn't know that was my favorite color, but she noticed that's the most color I've got. I didn't bring anything different than blue. Never even paid attention to it. They're just shirts I like to wear. Got blue on now. Apparently, blue is my favorite color. Before you can surprise somebody with something they really like or want, you got to know what they like. So that's the reason for number 6. And find out what your spouse is really like. Get to know each other. The longer you live together, the happier you ought to be. And largely for this kind of thing right here, you know what the other likes. So next screen is accepting a design that says men are sight motivated and women are feelings motivated. If you accept this, you'll sustain your marriage, sexual behavior, and intimate relationship so much longer than you would if you don't pay attention to this. I go back to that circle, the dotted line between it, his half, her half. We're forgetting any obligation to each other now. We're just talking about the paradigm itself. and just making an acceptance. Accept it. This is the way we're made. He is sight motivated. She is feelings motivated. She's more about how you make her feel. He's more about how things look. The classic example in the Bible, the classic, there are others, but the classic is David, who we already mentioned had a harem. He had wives. He could have just told a guard, he could have summoned his man and go get Abigail, tell her I want to meet her upstairs. But what he saw was what he wanted. He was motivated by a woman he saw that he did not know. He wanted what he saw. It turned into sin. And so it is. And so, except that your husband is sight motivated, don't feel cheap if he says something about your appearance. He's flattering you, he's complimenting you. Except that she is not aroused by how you look. She's much more aroused by how you are and how you behave and how you treat her. I have watched women cringe over their husband's behavior in public. We have sat in restaurants. My wife and I have sat in restaurants, and we have amused ourselves in watching couples that were clearly having problems here and there. It's so easy to spot some. Your heart kind of goes out to them, but you realize it's all because they're just not accepting the way things are. Her feelings are much more important than how you look when you went out to a restaurant. If you insult the waiter, you've embarrassed her. If you're loud and obnoxious, you've made her see you in a bad light. If you say something to her so rude other people can hear it, you're just out of control. And she's trying to just get through the meal and get out. But if you treat her with dignity and respect, and you show affection and kindness, and you treat everybody around you with respect and dignity, what you're doing is you're playing on things that make her feel good. She is feelings motivated. He is sight motivated. So accept that. That concludes session 5. And the next session, session 6, will be on marriage killers. All right, this is session 6 of 7. And it's on 3 marriage killers. The first marriage killer is the other woman. Remember a moment ago, or a few sessions ago, however you're watching, I talked about Solomon. When he started writing the book of Proverbs, or that book, he was writing to sons. Those first several chapters, he was writing to sons. My sons. He told them some awesome things. Don't tarry long at the wine. That's what common men do. They get drunk. They go into a rage. But that's not for princes. That's not for men that would be king. And then in the middle of all of his lecture to them about listening to wisdom and treating people right, he repeatedly comes back to this theme. In Proverbs, the phrase is the strange woman, not the other one. Strange does not mean weird, nor does it mean prostitute in all cases. In many cases in the first 7 chapters. Strange simply means someone other than the one you're married to, someone else. And so the only reason that this is listed here is not like, well, you can't help anything about the other woman, but the truth is, yes, you can. And if you're a man, you can avoid the other woman by simply understanding the dynamic that's at work in the other woman. Read the first 7 chapters of Proverbs. He describes what the other woman does. She flatters you. Well, there you go. With her lips. And she smells good, and she looks good, and she pays attention to how she looks. But most of all, she flatters you. And then when she's lacking anything else to do, she flatters you. And I'm embellishing a point to say she makes you hear what you want to hear about you. It would be, it's a good place to say this, although the topic doesn't demand it. But it's a good place to say this. I'll couch my words carefully. Self-gratification has been proven to be much less about lust for someone else as much as about self-love for the individual. Those who self-gratify invariably are convincing themselves that someone out there could love them even though their spouse doesn't. I have said before, I've made a phrase that into every man's middle years, there will come another woman, the other woman. I probably could say the same thing about women nowadays because we've changed dynamically so much in the last couple of generations. Every man and woman are both in the workplace. Almost every family is a two-member working family, and we're always exposed to flirters and tempters and carnal people and people who have more lust than they have brains and so on and so forth. But I certainly know the dynamic is at work in men because of Proverbs and the relationship that Solomon describes very well. So basically what the other woman is she is a woman who fills in the ingredients that are missing from the wife. When the wife is not aware of the importance of the sexual dynamic, the other woman is, and she says so, she verbalizes it. Flatters with her lips is there a number of times. And so what she's saying is, to him who has probably resorted to self-gratification, I could love you. I could love you the way you are. The other dynamic at work with the other woman and in the middle years is that by the time a man or a woman reaches middle years, they finally usually have become somewhat successful. Finally, they reach a place they're no longer scrimping to pay every bill, all the bills that they used to have. Finally managed to manage money. They've got some things going for them. They've got a little bit of stuff working right. They know how to dress, how to act, and they're not desperate like they had been in the early days. So they're confident now. And they've probably been promoted a time or two. They have their own business, and they're comfortable now. And in that comfort, they're not really recognized for what they have become. The spouse sometimes continues to hang on to what they used to be. And it's a very painful thing for a man to feel like he is always viewed by his past mistakes rather than for what he has become. The other woman, don't curse her, don't swear about her, don't call her a slut, don't call her any names. What the other woman does is she sees the man he has become. She cannot judge him for what he used to be and how many mistakes he made to get to where he is. All she sees is a successful man who has learned how to treat people, who's got a nice attitude, who is kind and respectful and somewhat successful, and that's what she sees. She doesn't see, well, if she knew you like I do, but she doesn't know you like you do, him like you do. So that's the power of the appeal. Solomon tried to warn his sons about it and wrote those first several chapters. Interspersed in there constantly is that other woman. And that's what he was trying to warn about, that's going to happen. And so the warning should not just be he wrote to his boys, don't do this, don't go that direction, don't follow her. The warning should also go to the wife, and that is, that's what's going to happen if you completely stay stuck in the past. Don't stay stuck in what he used to be. Continue to accept him for what he is becoming and has become, and then you'll never have any competition, because the greatest competition is not the shape of the body or the money the woman has. The greatest competition, and Proverbs reiterates this several times, is what she makes him feel about himself, the flattering of the lips. And so the danger for the wife is, if you're not careful, you never let your husband live down the mistakes he made. You remember when you went bankrupt? You remember we couldn't pay the bill? Oh my God, I'm so tired. The light bills were turned off 3 times. I can't believe you don't remember that. He remembers everything. Stop. The other woman doesn't know any of that ever happened. All she sees is a good guy. And that's what he is attracted to. He's not attracted to her because the body, the sex, the money. He's attracted to how she makes him forget his past and be comfortable in who he has become. That's the damage of the other woman, and it will kill a marriage. Number 2, don't ever use sex or gifts as leverage to get something else. If you ever hold back intimacy because you want him to do something or her, you made a disastrous killer of a mistake. If you use gifts to try to get sex, you have cheapened the experience. That's one of the cheapest ways you can treat a woman if you're a man, is to think that, yeah, well, I know we argued like crazy last week, but if I buy her this car, we'll probably have relations. That's just dumb. But it also says something dumb about her. She is so stupid and so naive and so gullible and so dumb. She doesn't need an apology. She doesn't need you to change your habits. She doesn't need you to start treating her differently. She doesn't need you to grow up. She just needs a car. And that's just dumb. It's an insult to use sex and or money as leverage to try to get your spouse to do something else. It is a surefire way to kill a marriage. And then number 3 is, if we filter our spouses through a previous spouse or through our other relationships that we've had, we will literally ruin the relationship we have. The only time, not the only time, the time this becomes most critical is in second marriages. If you've been married before and it takes you a while to decide to get married again, when you get married a second time, one of the hardest things for us to do is take off the glasses that have the memories of the last spouse. We continue to view the new one through a lens of the old one. And the first time the new one says something outrageously crazy and mad, all I can see is, that's what the last one said. That's the way, and now the new one doesn't have a chance. He's not judged by what he does. He's judged by what somebody else does. She's not capable of just standing now on her own and you judging her that way. She's done because you measured her by the last woman or 2 or 3 or whatever. And so we got to learn to take the lenses off and just embrace the person we have chosen to marry because we loved them, and forget the past and all of its abuses. First of all, you wouldn't have married the person you married if you had thought they were capable of duplicating any past sins against you. So give them the benefit of the doubt. Everybody's got a temper and an emotion, and everybody's got some weak moments and dark moments. Everybody is frail at some point. We all break over certain things. It doesn't mean we're going to duplicate crimes that you've experienced in your past. You chose the person you're married to because you trusted them and you loved them. You should not ever think that one hiccup in their behavior is a telltale sign they're going to be just like, because I'll tell you, nobody can live in that comparison long. No one can live because you compare them to a bad dad or a bad mom, and nobody can live under the shadow of a former spouse or former lover or former friend. You just can't. Surefire way to kill a marriage is to do those 3 things. That concludes session 6 of 7, and we'll wrap up with 7 of 7 in just a moment. All right, this is 7 of 7, and it's our last, it's kind of a conclusion, it's our wrap up. We're going to wrap up with this one, and it's just 4 things on the screen, and we're going to put them all up at one time. Oops, already did, didn't I? Number 1, don't forget to date occasionally, and don't take this the wrong way, and I'm not telling you there's a right way and a wrong way to do it, but I am telling you that it's all right if you've got a date night set aside, but I think it's probably a mistake. And the only reason for that is, once you say, we're going to set every Tuesday night's our date night, and then the sure as the world something's going to happen next Tuesday, and somebody's going to have a crisis, and then you feel like you broke something. One of the kids got sick. We didn't have a choice. Well, I know, but we could have made your mother come over and keep them. She's not afraid of catching COVID-19. She could have come over. Nobody cares. We should have. So now you feel like you betrayed somebody, when all you were doing was taking care of a life problem. You got it? Number 1, occasionally is the word. Don't put it on a calendar, because then when you break it, you change priorities. The spouse is not as important as what I had to do. I had to go to work. Well, that's why you don't put it on a calendar. You can't put love on a calendar. You can't put romance on a calendar. Don't make a date night that you have to live by. Just date sometimes. Just go out. My wife and I went to dinner. I don't remember when. Last night? When did we eat at Jasper's? Night before last? My wife and I went to Jasper's not sometime recently. If you don't know it, Jasper's is a little high dollar. It's not a place you just say, hey, let's just run up here and get a burger. It's a little high dollar. But I wanted something nice. I wanted to take my sunshine somewhere nice. So we went to Jasper's. Nobody's business. We just go up and pull in the fancy little park area, and we go into Jasper's to order tenderloins and I don't know what else, ribs or salmon or something. Nice, a little pricey, nice. While we're sitting there, one of our children calls. What are y'all doing? And she can't call, she calls on FaceTime. We're in a restaurant, and now we have to FaceTime. Well, we don't, but someone at the table does. What are y'all doing? It's loud. We're just calling to see what y'all are doing. My wife. Well, we're eating at Jasper's. And there's a silence for a moment. What? Jasper's? Did I miss an anniversary or something? Is that the only time I can take my wife to a nice restaurant is anniversary? Please. So I had to listen to this exchange go on a little bit. Hey, that's date night for us. It wasn't on the calendar, it's just date night. Of course, we can have a lot of date nights now that the kids are gone. Thank God, don't bring them back. We're not wanting them back. Just keep things going like they are. The point I'm trying to make is you and your spouse need to remember that you just need to get together now and then. Kids can dominate, and that brings us to number 2. I don't have to click. That brings us to number 2. You need to keep the bedroom a place that you and your spouse go to at the end of the day. It does not need to be a utility room. It does not need to be the clutter catch-all room. It does not need to be the kids' room unless you got to have an infant in a bassinet by the bed. As soon as that little toddler is big enough to sleep in a bed, you need to get him out of that room. I'm not trying to give you parenting advice, and I don't want you to cripple your children forever mentally and emotionally by cutting the umbilical cord, before they're 15 years old. But I am telling you that if you don't do that, after a while, you and your spouse lose one of the greatest moments you have to just bond and draw close to each other. You need to be able to have a safe place to go into. If you're going to throw clutter somewhere, don't clutter the bedroom. Throw it in the closet, throw it in the garage, but keep a place that belongs to you and your husband forever. Because you're not going to have your kids forever, you know that. They're not going to be with you forever. Number 3, keep the kids in their place, not between you and your spouse. Number 4 says, keep a future alive. And here's the question that we'll close with. What will you do after? I didn't finish that sentence. What are you going to do after your kids are gone? What are you going to do when the kids are gone? Are you going to love each other then? Are you going to have sexual relations then? Are you going to be kind and soft and tender then? Are you going to pick up your clothes then? Are you going to wash things and clean things then? What are you going to do after? What if one of you lost a job? What will you do after that crisis occurs? Just always be thinking that this is not the end all right now. This is just a stepping stone to something else and something else and something else. Always improving, always building, always getting better, always learning from your mistakes, and always keeping an eye on next year. What are you going to do now? Where are you going to be? Where are you going to be this same time next year? In your marriage, I'm talking about. Are you going to be better? Are you going to be worse? Are you sitting around right now saying, I'll tell you one thing, if things don't change, we ain't going to make it. Well, you might not make it talking and thinking that way. That's why number 4 is up here as our last statement. You need to keep a future alive for you and your spouse. Always be planning for the future and always knowing no matter how many kids you're involved in today and what activities and they have, and we've been through it. You go through all these things, school, games, balls, all that stuff, but all that's temporary. When it's all gone, it's just the 2 of you. What are you going to do then? Every step of the way, you need to be thinking about what's next for us. what's next. God bless you. I hope this has been of some value to you, and I hope that your marriages last forever. My wife and I are working on 40 some odd years. We're working on 48 years. I knew she would know the exact number, and I will tell you that every year gets better than the last. I hope and pray for you and for your marriage that that's the way it works for you. God bless you. Thank you for tuning in. And that concludes session 7 of 7, our seminar. God bless all of you as our